Whether it's the small green satchel you found off your first kobold, that pair of common quality shoulders that dropped in the Barrens, or seeing an epic BOE drop, loot in World of Warcraft has always been one of the things that make it exciting, all the way from the start of your journey right to the end game and raiding. In vanilla back in the day, getting your first epic was like a rite of passage. Even if you did manage to see inside a piece of raiding content, the chance you were actually going to be awarded an item among your 39 other raiders wasn't all that high. In TBC, you could reliably expect to get epics from 5-man heroics, but they were difficult, but at least you had badges so you can eventually guarantee that you can buy something. And in Wrath, well, you'd be hard pressed not to find some purples on your character after a few weeks. And for some players, the gearing ladder, that going from fresh to bis, is what the game is really all about. And why shouldn't it be? One of the core features of an MMO is that your character exists in a persistent world and gradually gains power. And what better method to gauge that power gain than getting some perps? But getting those perps, especially the bis ones, whatever the expansion, turns out to be quite difficult. Guilds will reserve items, favor certain raiders over others, or prioritize roles for loot. And pugs are just unreliable and full of drama. People have connection issues after their item doesn't drop, players needing on stuff that's useless for them, and people performing terribly that you have to carry, and of course they are gonna roll higher than you when the item you want drops. What if there is a better way to do all this? A way to skip the queue? A way to know for almost certain that if an item drops, you'll be able to get it without all the hassle of guilds or forming hard res groups? Well, many years ago, players came to a conclusion that there was, and this is done through gold. We make a raid, we invite a mix of people. Some of them don't need any items, but they're gonna perform very well. These are the carry players. Others are fresh level capped characters and they need loads of items, but they're gonna perform very poorly. These are the buyers. We run through the content and at the end of it, auction off every piece of gear. Highest bidder wins. No loot drama, no, that's not bis for you. The only metric that matters is how much is this item worth to you. Then at the end, the total pot of gold from all the auctions is divided out amongst the group. Everyone is a winner. The geared players have a reason to run and farm old content, and the fresh characters walk out with several purples. This loot system is known as GDKP, a mix of the infamous DKP system, which awarded players points based upon various guild set rules such as attendance, boss kills and so on, and they could then go on to use those points to bid on gear, and the G stands for gold. Except the whole point system is just replaced by gold. You bid on items with gold. That's it really. And there's so many benefits to it. Everyone leaves with something. If you don't get items, you get gold. There's no faster way to gear a fresh character than entering a GDKP with a full wallet. You know full well that nobody is going to have connection issues halfway through, because if they do, well, they're not going to get their cut at the end of the raid, are they? You can add further incentives such as a performance cut for players who are best on DPS. This gives people a reason to actually want to try and perform well during these raids. And believe me, since they started to get popular in Classic, there is no gold maker in the entire game which can even remotely compete with taking other players' earnings in exchange for epics. But it shouldn't be a surprise that GDKPs have made a big return to Classic. They are an older invention than even Warcraft as an MMO, having roots in EverQuest alongside the original DKP loot system. Players realized pretty early on that, hey, even though we don't need anything from this content, other people do, and we do need their gold. In original vanilla, the idea of a GDKP was, well, very sparse, which in retrospect, with how much top guilds struggled on progression content, is a bit of a surprise to be honest, considering that consumables were stacked by the dozen back then too. They would have needed loads of gold. I'm sure there's the odd story of the occasional bit of loot being auctioned off in vanilla, but as a widespread phenomenon, no, it really wasn't. In TBC, there was a few more rumblings of people frequently joining the odd GDKP, and by the Sunwell patch, all prior raid content had been nerfed, making it really easy and accessible. That being the likes of Tier 4 with Magtherid and Gruul's Lair and Karazhan were simple starting points for this loot system, and players would often go and clear the trash at the start of the Sunwell and then sell off the very powerful epic recipes and BOEs. But it was really in Wrath of the Lich King that the GDKP began to show its head as a loot system that more and more players engage with, particularly Thankfully, there are many articles out there which began to crop up around mid to late 2010, which in the World of Warcraft timeline was during the ICC patch. And Wrath was the perfect time for this loot system to go viral. By ICC, players were mega geared and could easily go back and crush old content to farm some gold. There was both 10 and 25 man modes for each raid, giving players choice, and as we well know nowadays, Wrath of the Lich King had the highest sub count ever. Lots of potential customers out there for those purples. One of the earliest articles I could find about World of Warcraft and GDKP was from a blog released 1 month before Wrath dropped. It quotes a post from Elitist Jerks on how GDKP works. Unfortunately, the Elitist Jerk page link didn't work, but they certainly have the basics down, including the upsides such as players are encouraged to stay right to the end, well-geared main characters are encouraged to come even if they don't want any drops, and well-healed ults can get geared up quickly without much grind. They also highlight the downsides. It encourages gold selling, and if you could spend some real cash for in-game gold and translate it so easily into items via a GDKP run, why would you do anything else? And they do also mention all Blizzard, or any company for that matter, needs to do is complete the circle and sell gold themselves. Well, we don't quite have that in Wrath. The WoW token came out in Warlords of Draenor, but the gold buying from third-party websites to then spend in-game on items has always been a concern, and a valid one at that. You know, looking through these old articles and posts, at the time GDKP was seen a little cautiously, but generally positively. People like the idea of raiding for gold and having reasons to go back and do old content, which, for a time, was the focus of GDKP. Surely, it wouldn't ever replace raiding with a guild on current content, let alone hard mode or heroic content, would it? Enter classic World of Warcraft. Some 15 years after the original release, the game was back, this time with a very different player base. Instead of Rag living for months, he lived for a number of days. Each and every raid tier upon release was cleared within an hour or less, and those once revered purples flowed like water. Players rather quickly figured out, gee, this content's pretty easy, as well as, man, flasks sure are expensive. What if we were to take the long-standing tradition of the GDKP and bring it back way earlier than it ever was before? And that is indeed what happened. There weren't too many GDKPs early on because, well, you needed some time for the buyers to level up, but by the time Blackwing Lure was out, well, we were well in the swing of things, and prices that items were going for totally out of the belief of any reasonable person. Oh, and by the way, very early on in Classic, I may hypothetically know that one Classic gold was worth about 1k retail. No, really, gold was a huge part of Classic. So when you went out and farmed your 80 gold per hour and thought, that's not half bad, I feel quite good about myself there, and then you went on the internet and read Bone Reaver's Edge goes for 51,000 gold, Dragonspine Trophy goes for 37,000 gold in a different GDKP. Actually, I'm joking, that's cheap. It went for 46k in this one, for example. And then Naxxramas came around and you began seeing pots come out at 87k for the entire raid. And perhaps to top it all off, Gressel Dawn of Ruin, the best one-handed sword in the game, selling for a total of 198,000 gold, which is just about 20k shy of the gold cap in the game. Well, you saw that and thought to yourself, wow, why am I here thieving in Blackrot depths for minimum wage when I could be making thousands an hour instead if I join a GDKP? It begged the question, how on earth is anyone able to amass such vast quantities of gold? And benefit of the doubt, if they have faithfully been spending 18 hours a day in Diamol East for 3 weeks straight, why would they drop that entire sum of gold, all that work, on one single item? It just doesn't quite add up, does it? Moving into TBC, those BIS items kept dropping and the insane gold bids kept rolling in. Dragonfang Talisman became the new Drakespine Trophy, and there are so many cases of it going for well in excess of 50,000 gold. The Black Temple brought with it the infamous War Glaives of Azzinoth, often pre-sold to ensure a good price. It wasn't unusual in the early weeks to see them well upwards of 6 figures of gold for each of these legendary items. Warriors with somewhat questionable gear alongside a glaive would occasionally begin to appear on your server, and during the opening week of the Sunwell, a GDKP cleared the entire instance, netting a total pot of just in excess of 1 million gold, during which Thoridal the Star's Fury dropped and was bought for the unreal price of 350,000 gold by a warrior. And in Wrath it's still early days, but prices are down on what they used to be in Classic and TBC due to generally more gearing options and smaller raid sizes. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the potential downside of GDKPs encouraging gold buying is very, very real. There is quite literally no other part of the game that deals with volumes of gold this large. In fact, it wasn't till Wrath where Blizzard started putting things in the game such as the Dalaran epic rings for just under 8k or the Traveler's Tundra Mammoth for 16k that there was an actual reason to have this much cash lying about. Before that, it was all player driven, and in Classic, player driven meant somebody had nearly 200,000 gold to spend on one item. Today we are still in tier 7 with Ulduar expected early 2023, and it's going to be pre-nerf Ulduar 2 with boosted item level gear, and I can tell you without a doubt that GDKPs will clear it week 1. Remember, Thoridal went for 350,000 gold week 1. Imagine the price of boosted item level weapons from Algalon or Yogg-Saron, for example. You bet the gold seller, honest players running 24 GDKPs a week are after that payout. And that right there is the big distinction between GDKP back then in 2008 to 10 and today. Gold can replace a guild, but it ain't cheap. The main reasons are that A, turns out the content is still pretty easy for us. B, people are just generally much better at the game. We understand it better, we know how to min-max better, we know all the tactics in advance. And C, the stakes are higher. There's more gold involved now than there ever was before. And with GDKP becoming a lot more visible, there's been a lot more criticism of it. What was once curiosity has now for many turned to disdain. Where there was once pug runs and soft reserve runs, now there's gold runs. Gameplay has been replaced by a race to reach the finish line and restart a new character. One such post from a Chinese player during Classic highlights how after NetEase released the World of Warcraft token on Chinese realms during Phase 2, gold farmers flocked to NA as they could make up to 7 times as much from farming there, and to this day North American realms always seem to be the region that has the most attempts at botting. The WoW forums and Reddit frequently spark arguments that GDKP has gone too far. It's replacing the game with paid services, clearly incentivized by buying gold for real money. What was once guilds running old content back then has turned into a substitution for raiding with a guild. GDKP has also very quickly and clearly become the most lucrative gold farm possible in the game. Why on earth would I go herbing or farming in the open world when I can pocket potentially thousands of gold for an easy raid clear for somebody else's fresh alt? Again, it's hard to argue with the results, but Blizzard, so far, have been pretty content to leave this player-made environment exist. In the past, they've gone after other player discoveries such as boosting, which they finally determined as being not healthy for the game. It is still possible, just to a lesser degree than it once was. Should they go after GDKPs next? How would that even be done? There's hardly gonna be a GM watching over every raid, is there? For me in this situation, I've never really been a fan of the whole GDKP system. Of course, I think beyond anything else it encourages gold buying, though I will say since TBC, the actual need for gold in order to get consumed, raid, PvP and so on is just way down on what it was in Classic. But it's not just that, it's just kind of GDKP breaks what the game is all about for me, and here's what I mean. For me, Classic, and I guess WoW as a whole, is like a pyramid of content. At the bottom you have leveling your character, and then you have the middle portion, your farming badges, your prebis, professions, enchants, gems, gold farming, all of that good stuff. And right at the top of the pyramid is raiding. That's the peak, that's what it's all for. That's why I'm going out to learn my class, seeing what talents work best, making sure I have the correct consumables and so on. I want to do as well as possible when I raid. So when I take raiding and then just turn it into another gold farm, it's like the top of the pyramid has been taken off and thrown into mid-game content. It's just not what raiding should be for me. I farm gold so I can raid, I don't raid to farm gold, and I like to keep those two things completely separate as much as I can, but again, that's just me. I think there's definitely a divide between players who are more loot driven and are more content driven. I mean, how many people did you hear quit back in Classic or TBC after they got that one item they've been after forever? You can even test this too. Take this example. Imagine the scenario, you're doing a speedrun with your guild of Nax 25, you're not aiming for world first or anything, just trying to get your 1 hour 15 clear down to a 1 hour 5 minute clear, for example, and in the end everything goes amazingly, better than you could have possibly imagined, and you get a sub 1 hour clear. Not only that, but you get immortal as well because nobody died. However, nothing dropped that you wanted? Or would you prefer joining a GDKP weekly of next 25 and 2 BIS items for you go for really cheap? Imagine you're on your warrior and Grimtal and Betrayer of Humanity drop for only a few thousand gold each, or being a caster and getting Dying Curse and the Turning Tide for the same amount. Which scenario would you feel better about? Amazing run with your guild, or cheap epics in a GDKP? Not that there's a wrong answer, it's just people are motivated differently, that's all. In any event, it appears that GDKP is here to stay. Having become popular in Classic so much earlier than it ever did in Vanilla, it's now grown into a core gold farm and alt gearing system for many players around the world. Though honestly, I'd rather it wasn't really a thing. I don't see a realistic way to actually stop it from happening. Even if you stop people advertising it at this point, it's so well established people would just go seeking it out. I guess it's a bit of a testament of how players choose to engage with the game differently nowadays. Everyone wants something of value for their time when they're playing a video game, and no one wants to waste their time playing World of Warcraft. Makes you think a bit, doesn't it? Anyways, hope you liked the video. If you did, drop a like, it helps out. Let me know your thoughts and experiences on or in GDKPs if you have any. And as always, thank you for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.